All right, thank you everybody for joining us this afternoon. It's been a great pleasure to be here in Hillcrest with my colleague, Senator Martucci, Senator Joe Angelino. We're also joined by Broome County Majority Leader Cindy O'Brien. Cindy, thank you for being with us. Legislator Greg Baldwin, former mayor of Binghamton, Rich David. Mayor, thank you for joining us. The police chief from Binghamton and other elected officials. Most importantly, we are with today Jim and Kyle Steinberg, and we are here to talk about what is an incredibly important issue to not only folks in Senator Martucci's district, but to all New Yorkers. I want to acknowledge all of our first responders who are here with us today as well. These are the men and women who really are the backbone of this community with respect to keeping us all safe. You know, 3 years ago, my colleagues and I stood up and we spoke out about the disastrous bail reform and what it would do to communities across this great state. Unfortunately, there are those in Albany who sit in their white ivory tower, continue to have their heads buried in the sand, and they continue to advocate for and move policies that are destructive to this state. But you know what? Today is not about those people. Today is about a community hero named Billy Steinberg. It's about a beloved father, a beloved husband and son who's lost his life keeping our community safe. It's about a hero whose death was completely preventable had the spineless bureaucrats, the tone-deaf bureaucrats in Albany made decisions that were in the best interest of New Yorkers. If they were making decisions not based on their political donors, not based on what the political activists want, but what everyday, hardworking, law-abiding New Yorkers want. This, in fact, would have never, ever happened. But as we say all the time in Albany, it's one thing to complain about something, more important to put forth either a piece of policy or a plan in place that can correct a wrong. And with that, I will introduce my colleague, Senator Mike Martucci, who has done just that. Senator?
So thank you again for joining us, and I certainly thank the men and women who stand behind me, especially the men and women who are part of the volunteer fire service and fire service here in the Broome County community all across New York State. As my friend Senator Akshar said, the reason we're standing here is because of a man who I had the opportunity to meet and know personally, Billy Steinberg. Billy was about my age, 37 years old, and was a resident in Forestburgh, which is in nearby Sullivan County. And I had a couple opportunities to meet Billy. The first was on a Santa run that we did together on the fire truck, where we went around and gave Christmas gifts to the seniors and children in the community. And then second, most recently this summer, I went down at the fire department where he proudly served 5 generations of Steinbergs served at the Forestburgh Fire Department. Here with us, generation 3 and 5. But what's missing is generation 4, Billy. And there's a really clear reason for that. In Sullivan County, just this year, just this January, an individual was arrested not once but twice, 2 times for felony arson in Sullivan County, and because of the state's failed bail reform policy, was required to be released by a judge. Each and every time, this individual set a felony arson. Most recently, a felony arson was set, and this individual was arrested on January 14th. January 14th of 2022, one day before Billy Steinberg died fighting in an arson fire that was set by that very same person. The state police here in the state of New York arrested and were required to release an individual who, less than 24 hours later, set an arson fire where Billy Steinberg died. So, if there wasn't enough evidence before, there certainly is enough evidence now. You don't need to look even beyond this case to understand how failed this policy is and how this policy puts our brave firefighters all around our state at risk every day. So with that, my friend Jim Steinberg called me just days after the funeral. And to be at the funeral was really moving, to see thousands and thousands of firefighters lining Broadway and Monticello and watch Jim carry his son's fire helmet, leading the funeral funeral procession to St. Peter's Church says it all. And Jim called me and said, Mike, we have to do something. We have to do it for Billy. We have to do it because no family should ever suffer the way that our family is suffering. And we did just that. So Jim and I worked together and crafted a law that we're calling Billy's Law. And what this law very simply does is take every arson statute right now, believe it or not, arson third, felony arson third, and felony arson fourth, require that you immediately be released on an appearance ticket in the state of New York. And what Billy's Law does is it takes every single felony arson charge, including felony arson third and fourth, and subjects those charges to bail so that judges have tools at their discretion to incarcerate individuals who set fires. Today, you're going to hear from Billy's dad, Jim, yourself, and you'll get a real perspective on what it's like to be a family who's lived through this. And not lived through this years ago, but lived through this in the last month. And again, I could not be prouder to carry Billy's Law. Jim and Billy's stepson Kyle and myself and my team are traveling around New York State, gaining support for this provision. Because what we want to make sure is that no firefighter ever loses their life in the line of duty at the hands of a serial arsonist again. And Billy's Law will do just that. So I want to thank Senator Akshar for hosting us here today. I want to thank my colleagues who stand behind me, colleagues in law enforcement, colleagues in the legislature, and certainly a big thank you to the men and women of the fire service who continue, for absolutely no compensation, to step forward, to keep our communities safe, to ensure that the places that we live and our families can be safe. The very least we can do to honor Assistant Chief Billy Steinberg's honor, and the least we can do in service to the men and women behind me and their families is make sure that we pass this law to keep our firemen safe. So thank you so much for having me, Senator. I look forward to continuing to work together to make this happen. Thank you.
I think what's important to note, this is not, so some will, we talk about bail reform a lot, right? And some will accuse us of fear-mongering or that we're posturing politically, right? This is an issue that both Republicans and Democrats agree on. Look no further than the new mayor in the city of New York, Mayor Adams. He too is calling for significant changes to the bail reform law, but he too, even being a Democrat from a very liberal New York City, is running up against a wall from others, leadership frankly, in Albany, having an unwillingness to make changes to that law. Before I introduce Jim, I want to allow Assemblyman Joe Angelino to come up and say a few words. Assemblyman?
Well, thank you very much, and I appreciate all of the support here. Preponderance of the men and women behind me are volunteer firefighters, some are career. But 2 years ago, I was propelled to the seat that I am in now because of bail reform. As a retired police chief, the people of the 122nd District saw that this was not going to work out. We predicted what was going to happen, and it did. I never dreamed it would be this bad. As a retired police officer, the cops were used to always being on the bad end of the stick when it came to laws out of Albany. And I've stood in large formations of police officers in the past trying to explain this is not going to work. Apparently, my colleagues from the New York City area have a different tolerance to crime and criminals. My district, they want to see justice done, they want law and order, and they want victims ahead of criminals. That's what propelled me. Now, here I am in the seat, and I'm fighting an uphill battle every day. This experiment they call bail reform has failed. It was a social experiment to begin with, and now it failed. The people who created this now have the blood of Chief Steinberg on their hands. And this is just a travesty that needs to be corrected. I can't speak enough about the men and women behind me. Most of them volunteers, put their lives on the line, lost a life of one of their own, and the person should have been in jail. This is just ridiculous, and it needs to end. I want to get back to Albany. I'm willing to talk to anybody about this compromise. We just have to have some sanity for this, and I don't see it coming anytime soon. And to the Forestburgh Fire Department members here, thank you for making the trip up. Senator Martucci, thank you very much for organizing this and bringing this to my district, and Senator Akshar's district. Thank you very much.
Allow me to introduce Jim Steinberg, father of Billy Steinberg. Before I do, Chief, on behalf of the people that I so proudly represent, there are more than 300,000 of them. And on behalf of the men and women who stand behind you, we offer our condolences to you. The men and women who are in this room today recognize that the death of your son was completely preventable. Should have never, ever happened. And regardless of what that uphill battle looks like, regardless of what that fight looks like, there are people, I would add one more thing, despite what comes from the State House and the rhetoric that comes from the State House, there are people who in fact care. There are people who in fact recognize the sacrifice that these men and women behind us make every day, just like the sacrifice your son did. And regardless of how big that hill is, regardless of how big that fight is, we will continue to fight on behalf of the New Yorkers that we so proudly represent, but most importantly on behalf of your son. With that, Chief Steinberg.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to thank all the firemen for coming to support Billy's bill. I am a long-life, proud, active member of the Forestburgh Fire Company, an ex-chief and currently chairman of the Board of Firefighters. Today, I stand before you as the father of Assistant Chief Billy Steinberg, who lost his life January 15, 2022, after 22 years of dedicated service. And as we are here today to cite and promote Billy's law. Billy is a caring and dedicated young man to his community and to his fire service his entire life. Billy was always concerned about the safety and welfare to his town and residents. As an Eagle Scout project, he designed, made, and installed 539 reflective signs in the fire district in order to assist emergency personnel to enable them to locate and find the correct address in those in time of need. He loved taking pictures of sunrises and sunsets. Wherever he was, because he thought it was beautiful. Because he enjoyed them so much, because as a little boy, his mother always sang, "You are my sunshine." Like Mr. Martucci said, our fire department does a Christmas run every year. And he always waited to play Santa, because he enjoyed the putting smiles on kids' faces and their reactions. We have our Veterans Memorial Triangle in our town. Billy's taken care of that with pride, molding it to perfection since he was 14 years old. As a young man, Billy learned and knew the difference between right and wrong, and his loss is not to be taken in vain. As you may be aware, the fire that took my son Billy's life was intentionally set. The person responsible for this since admitted to setting fire to 3 structures in the last week. If New York bail reform had not been put in place by prior administration, this individual would have been retained in the Sullivan County Jail the first time he was arrested. But unfortunately, because of the bail reform, he was released and allowed to set one last fire that ultimately took Billy's life. The system has failed our community, my family, and Billy. At this time, I have pleaded with the Senate and the Assembly to change the bail reform to protect our firefighters, EMS, and law enforcement, and the citizens of New York, so they never have to endure this type of tragedy themselves. As we leave here today, remember these words: a hero is remembered, and a legend is not forgotten.
You know, anybody who wants to appease a political donor or a political activist, I would suggest that you look into the eyes of Chief Steinberg before they decide on what is right and what is wrong. What is right is addressing the issue that has so negatively impacted the lives of the Steinberg family. And, you know, the words that you say are so meaningful. And if only people would unbury their heads from the sand in Albany and recognize that the decisions that are being made have real life consequences, real life impacts. And nobody can tell that story better than you. And I would suggest to all of them, as Senator Martucci did the other day, when we were on the stairs of the Capitol speaking about this particular issue, And it's a story that he doesn't want to tell, but it's a story that must be told, because their decisions have real life impacts. You had mentioned that the person responsible for setting the fire that tragically took your son had set several other fires. We're joined by Police Chief Joseph Custom from the city of Binghamton. I have asked him just to say a few words about what he has seen in his long tenure in law enforcement specific to arsons. Chief?
You know, these serial arsonists, we've seen them here in the Binghamton area. 4 years ago next month, we had 3 large structure fires here in the city. Set the city on edge for the people that knew there was an arsonist. I'm sure the Binghamton firemen recall, and it was an individual who had basically burned down a whole block in deposit, went to state prison, got out, and he was a suspect in a trailer fire. Out back in deposit, and as our fires developed, in cooperation with the state police, he became a suspect, and he basically taunted us. We drove around, and we said, if I set this fire, I would have stood here and watched it, and if I set that fire, knowing the person didn't know, I might not have set that fire. So these people are out there. He later moved out of any cop, set 2 or 3 more fires, was ultimately arrested, and he was back in state prison. These individuals have to be taken off the street and incarcerated. Did a little research prior to coming here. In 2015 in North Carolina, a female has set 11 fires. 2 of those fires were after she'd already been arrested and charged for arson, and she set 2 more after that. So the bail reform is an issue for all law enforcement, for all citizens of the state, and this is a start to try to knock down that door that they built. It's putting all the lives of all first responders, from firemen to police officers, and EMS people. So I'd like to thank the senators and the assemblymen for their efforts, and I hope that it doesn't fall on deaf ears.
Thank you, Chief. I also want to acknowledge the presence of Broome County Fire Coordinator Jeff Butler. Jeff, thank you for being with us. Thank you for all that you're doing on behalf of firemen across Broome County. I just want to share one more point, and we'll take your questions. About 10 days ago, I was interviewing Chief Administrative Judge Marks in Albany at a budget subcommittee meeting, and we were discussing this issue of dangerousness. This is a fact. In the state of New York is the only state in the nation that does not allow a judge to weigh the dangerousness of a defendant when that defendant is before them and they are trying to decide what to do. Judge Marks, he's on the other side of the aisle, if you will. Even Judge Marks, the chief administrative judge in the state of New York, said that the vast majority of judges want the ability to be able to weigh the dangerousness of a defendant in front of them in making a determination whether or not they should release this person back into the community, and that weighs on them with respect to keeping communities safe. So it is long past time that leadership in Albany stops worrying about their donors and political activists, stop worrying about the way the political wind is blowing, and start worrying about people like Chief Steinberg and his family. With that, we'll take your questions if you have. Chief.